When it comes to RPGs, the PlayStation 1's library is filled to the brim. Final Fantasy, Vagrant Story, Saga Frontier, Legend of Mana, Parasite Eve, Xenogears, and those are just some of the ones Square put out. That doesn't even touch on Enix's side of things, or how the Persona series got its start here, or Wild Arms, or Legend of Dragoon, or the dozens of other titles I don't have time to list. Yes sir, everyone was after that sweet, sweet PS1 RPG cheddar, including Konami. Konami isn't the first Japanese company that springs to mind when it comes to RPGs, or the second. But man, the one time they went for it, they went for it! Say hello to Suikoden. Originally released in 1995 on the PS1 for Japanese players, it would take another year before North Americans could give it a shot, and PAL gamers had to wait all the way until April of '97. Suikoden's main claim to fame is the downright massive number of recruitable characters, 108 in total if you count the player character, each one with their own personality and reason for joining. Some even have special requirements before you can even recruit them. Obviously, certain characters have more story prominence than others. Can you imagine having to write alternative dialogue for every possible party combination? That's the kind of nightmare that would leave even the most prolific writers trembling. Suikoden still does the best it can though to make every recruit feel different in one way or another. The fantastic work by the character designers does a lot of the heavy lifting here. You'll find your favorites in no time, like my girl Valeria, though she'd probably run me through for calling her that. The biggest problem Suikoden has with juggling all these playable characters though is in how often it limits who you can choose by forcing multiple characters onto you before you can so much as think about progressing the story. While in moderation, this is a great way to force the player to vary their party by ensuring that they can't always have the optimal party for the situation, Suikoden really overdoes it and winds up causing the problem it's trying to avert. Because you'll often have to make room for several characters you aren't used to using if this is your first time playing, you'll wind up relying on a small core of consistent party members while never feeling quite satisfied with your party composition. After all, even if you find a group of frontline fighters you like, it's only a matter of time before Victor, Flick, or Gremio, especially Gremio, shove their way in again. Thankfully, this is a problem they mostly addressed in the sequel, but we're not there yet. Very loosely based on the classic Chinese novel Water Margin, Suikoden wears this fact on its sleeve with its title being literally the Japanese name for water margin. In the Japanese release, it's a little less lazy with the naming, as the series is known as Genso Suikoden, or Fantasy Water Margin. Hey, I said it was a little less lazy. Now, this may shock you, but the guy currently talking to you about an old game on YouTube is not very well read. Even less so when it comes to classic Chinese literature. The most I can say is that my love for Romance of the Three Kingdoms 10 spurred me to buy the translated books. I made it 2/3 of the way through Volume 1 before I kept losing track of the supporting characters. I'm not used to having to take notes when I'm not reading for a school project. Anyway, the point is that I don't know for sure what in Suikoden was taken from Water Margin, and what sprang from the developers' imaginations. From what I can tell, the main connections are a corrupt, decaying empire, an outlaw hero, and the number of heroes being specifically 108. In Suikoden, these 108 heroes are dubbed the Stars of Destiny. Once you get far enough into the game, you'll be given this handy-dandy stone to keep track of how many stars you've recruited so far. Though it is annoying that, since these names are magically carved into this stone, there's no way to sort it. Recruiting tons and tons of characters isn't the only thing to set Suikoden apart from its contemporaries. In addition to the classic turn-based battles and random encounters you'd expect, Suikoden boasts two other battle systems: army battles and duels. Well, I say two other systems, but they're both nearly identical, as they both rely on a rock-paper-scissors triangle. Army battles at least have a bundle of extra actions you can take to boost a specific attack or learn what the AI is going to pick next. Duels, meanwhile, are just attack, defend, and wild attack. In my experience, especially in regards to a certain nigh impossible, totally luck-based duel about halfway through the game, picking wild attack is basically suicide unless you've memorized the lines each boss says before the next round. These lines are the only thing that keep duels from being a total guessing game. They're still absolutely luck-based, and I don't understand why anyone would subject themselves to that one duel without access to save states, but it's not just blind guesswork. As for my opinion on the army battles, while it's good for what it is, I do get that they didn't want to overwhelm inexperienced players with something more strategy intensive. I'm personally a fan of strategy RPGs like Fire Emblem and Langrisser, and that experience leaves me wanting more from this. If nothing else, maybe a few different battles that weren't just a variation on besieging a castle. Ambush a convoy, an open field battle, or how about a big naval battle? No, using ships to besiege an island fortress doesn't count. This was an experimental concept for the time though, and it would be iterated on as the series progressed. However, both army battles and duels are few and far between. The main meat of the gameplay is still in the traditional combat you'd expect from virtually every RPG on the PS1, and there isn't a lot of innovation on this front. That wasn't exactly surprising to me even the first time I played this. I imagine it would be an extremely daunting task to have a game in which you have somewhere around 90 characters that can be placed into your party of 6, and have a well-balanced, innovative battle system. Keep it simple, stupid is in full effect here, and I feel that Suikoden is all the better for it. For me, when it comes to any RPG where I'm going to be fighting through hundreds or thousands of encounters, I want speed and efficiency. I don't want marathon battles with random encounters, overlong animations, or tons of extra fluff to keep track of. Boom, boom, boom. That's the rhythm I look for in my turn-based combat. With that in mind, Suikoden has one of my favorite combat systems in any game from this era. Everything is very straightforward. Fight, run, or let go if you're stronger than them. More games need that. Bribe, though they'll pry my hard-earned bits from my cold dead body. And auto battle. Free will in the case of this one. Once you pick fight, you'll get the standard attack, defend, magic, and item, as well as the option for a combination attack known as a unite attack. Oh, sorry, did I say magic before? I meant rune. Rune magic is the biggest deviation from what you'd expect of a console RPG at the time. Runes are items you'll find or buy that have to be attached to a character before they can be used. Once you do so, you can activate whatever ability it provides during battle. A few only offer passive boosts like an increased evasion rate, but most will offer some form of attack. This mainly comes in the form of magic that can only be cast a certain number of times before needing to rest in order to recover those slots, and the number of times you can cast increase as you level up. Weird, I never realized how much like D&D that is until I said it out loud. Resemblance to D&D mechanics is not exactly a common thing to see in a Japanese title. See, the early Western influences on the Japanese RPG scene were Ultima and wizardry. You can actually still see the wizardry influence all the way into modern series like the eternally underappreciated Etrian Odyssey, with first-person party-based dungeon crawling that can be brutally unforgiving. While Ultima's biggest influence can be seen in the classic top-down view on the overworld. Here's Ultima 1, and now here's Dragon Quest 1. Despite the fact that both Ultima and wizardry owed a ton to Dungeons & Dragons, not to mention that both series were attempts to recapture tabletop role-playing on computers, D&D itself has had very little presence in Japan even to this day. To my knowledge, at least. If I'm wrong, please let me know. If I am correct, I'm just gonna blame TSR and Wizards of the Coast for being incompetent boobs like usual and get back to talking about Suikoden. The other kind of runes that can be used to attack offer a variant on the normal physical attack. Most of these will come with the trade-off of the user being unbalanced on the next turn and unable to attack. Big damage now in exchange for less later. Except for the likes of Valeria and Ronnie, whose runes are broken as hell and can be used every turn. See? I like Valeria for mechanical reasons. Being a badass, gallant knight with beautiful flowing locks, it's just a bonus.
Boy, is he laying it on thick.
Moving on, those unite attacks I mentioned before are quite handy at shifting the tide of a tough battle. Provided a character has at least one compatible ally in the active party, they can choose to activate a unite attack that eats up the turns of every participant. The annoying part is in figuring out which characters are compatible. Several are obvious, typically being characters recruited at the same time or as part of the same mini-story arc. If you aren't using a guide though, you'll miss out on several other powerful combinations. I didn't even know Ronnie had one of the strongest unite attacks in the game because...
The smaller, remember, you can't forget.
With a ham sandwich. But enough about my own personal unite attacks, let's talk about equipping your party. Alongside the usual armor, helmet, shield, and accessories, each character in Suikoden comes equipped with the one weapon they'll be using for the rest of the game. However, you can give them a boost by having them sharpened at the nearest blacksmith. Weapons will even change their names after enough level ups. Even if I wound up spending probably about the same amount of money as I do in other RPGs that make me buy brand new weapons, there's something about this that I enjoy more. Maybe it's just an 8-brain number go up thing. I'm not entirely sure. Paying for all those upgrades to satisfy my primal craving for level ups was a snap thanks to the gambling minigames. While there are 3 in total available after recruiting certain characters, and 1 specific to an area that can be revisited, the big moneymaker is Chinchirorin. Roll 3 dice into a cup, and if 2 of them come up the same number, then the leftover die is your score. If you're super lucky or unlucky and roll 3 of a kind, you'll either lose triple if it's all 1s, 2s, or 3s, or you'll win triple if it's all 4s, 5s, or 6s. Couple being able to bet all your winnings on the next round with some good old-fashioned save scumming, and just like a successful Twitch streamer, you'll be swimming in bits in no time. Of course, I would never encourage such a tactic to save yourself time in a genre notorious for its lengthy playtime. Remember, it's not about having fun with older games in your own way or sharing these experiences with others. It's about playing them the exact same way previous generations did. The optimal way. Failure to do so is a moral failing on our part. Alright, it's spoiler time. If that's a concern for you, just skip ahead on here to get my final thoughts on the game. You play as the son of the Scarlet Moon Empire's famed General Teo McDall, who was canonically named Tyr, but I forgot and went with my old standby. So, Mike McDall, who already has more friends than his namesake, begins his own service in the Imperial Army. Unfortunately, his hopes of following in his father's footsteps are short-lived. After only his second mission, Mike learns that his best friend Ted is the bearer of the Soul Eater rune, and thanks to this asshole, the Emperor's court magician Windy now knows too. After escaping Windy's clutches once, only to have his location sold out by Pawn, the muscle of Mike's retainers, a desperate Ted convinces Mike to take the Soul Eater rune himself while Ted stays behind as a decoy to give Mike and his loyal retainers time to flee the city. Though not without considerable reservations, not to mention tons of fretting on the part of Mike's caretaker/surrogate parent Gremio, the party make their escape with the aid of a mysterious vagabond by the name of Victor. Branded as outlaws, the party have no choice but to flee south, where Victor plans to meet up with some friends. These friends just so happen to be members of the Tauran Liberation Army, the resistance group fighting back against the Scarlet Moon Empire's tyranny. Led by the steadfast Odessa, they seek to expose the corruption rotting the Empire from within and overthrow the Emperor Barbarossa. Having already seen said corruption with his own eyes on the last mission, and considering the Imperial Guards want to mount their heads on pikes, Mike figures it's a good idea to join up. Gremio disagrees. Then the party get roped into going anyways when a collapsed resistance fighter explains that he's from a group of mountain bandits whose leaders, Varkas and Sidonia, were apprehended by an Imperial Guard squad, then tied up and left to rot in the sun by the corrupt leader of the town of Rockland to serve as a warning. Now, the funny thing is, that Imperial Guard squad he's talking about, that would be Mike and his party. No time like the present to make up for past misdeeds, eh? Once they've redeemed themselves in the eyes of the Liberation Army by saving Varkas and Sidonia, Odessa decides to bring Mike and company along to deliver the plans for a secret weapon called the Fire Spear to her contact. But not before they get roofied and almost robbed on the way there. Mike, being the only one there smart enough to suspect the incredibly creepy man of having done something to the tea he made for them, did try to avoid drinking it himself. However, mysterious cosmic forces beyond his control forced him to drink the drugged tea in order to move on. I've always hated fake choices like this. Why even give me the option if you want me to pick this one? I'd really like to know if there's anyone for whom these fake choices add anything to the experience. That's not a call-out, I would genuinely like to hear if someone has an opposing viewpoint on this. Lucky for the group, the reason that they were almost robbed and not actually robbed is because the creepy guy's boss showed up in time to recognize Odessa. Utterly mortified, Creepo begs their forgiveness and lets them go on their way, swearing he'll never drug and rob others again. If I had a nickel for every time I've heard that promise. From there, the delivery of the plans goes smoothly, and it's not much later that we run into one of those story moments. The kind that aren't quite enough to make you give up on a story, but so take you out of the moment and make you cringe so hard that you're seriously considering it. Okay, so it's obvious that something's going to happen to Odessa, right? Rebel leaders that aren't the protagonist generally have an expiration date coming up real soon. I have no issue with that. In fact, I much prefer having a pre-existing resistance rather than having the rich kid with battle butlers be the first one to wake everyone up. The problem comes in the way it handles her death. After returning from their mission, Odessa's group learns that the Imperial Guard are in the process of raiding their headquarters. Instantly, Odessa dashes off ahead in the hopes of saving anyone who didn't escape in time. By the time you catch up with her, however, Odessa has sustained a fatal wound while defending a child. And right here is my problem. As she dies, she says that she chose to be a woman rather than the rebel leader.
I don't even know how to respond to this.
I can't figure out any other way to read that besides claiming that her feeble womanly instincts took over, and that being a leader means you can't be a woman. The last time lazy writing like that was still acceptable, men wore trousers that went up to their nipples, and we still called pants trousers. Now, I'm willing to give Suikoden the benefit of the doubt that this was a clumsy translation which misunderstood the lines. That happened all the time back then.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
In that case, though, I don't get how the localizers thought this was the right choice. On top of coming off like this bit of dialogue was written by an incel, this cheapens her sacrifice. She doesn't save the child because that very same heroic nature which led her to forming a resistance made it impossible for her to let a little kid die so that she could live, or any other plausible, tragic reason. She saves the child because her biological clock is ticking. This woman, leader of an armed uprising against the Scarlet Moon Empire, willing to fight and die for her cause, goes out like a woman in a 50s movie. And it's specifically this one part of the dialogue that ruins the scene. The rest of this, as cheesy as it can be, is still well done as everyone around her pleads for Odessa to hold on. With her last breath, she hands Mike an earring and tells him to seek out Matthew. There's even this great bit where the party struggles to heed her last request of chucking her body in the waterway in order to prevent news of her death from spreading and killing what's left of the Liberation Army's morale. An undignified end to a dignified leader. Powerful imagery there. Like I said, everything around it is good. It's just this one stupid bit here. It doesn't even line up with the rest of the game. There are tons of female characters in Suikoden with a wide variety of personalities, and at no point is being a woman treated as a hindrance to their ability to fight or lead in battle. Hell, Cleo is right frickin' there! I was a teenage edgelord the first time I played this game, and even then I did a full-on double take at Odessa's "I've chosen to be a woman rather than commander of the Liberation Army" line. Apologies to anyone who felt that was an excessive amount of rambling for a single line of dialogue. That moment has just always bothered me, and I had to say something about it before moving on. Once what remains of the Liberation Army manages to track down this mysterious Matthew, they quickly learn that Odessa was in fact his sister. Despite his strategic genius, Matthew wanted nothing to do with war of any kind and refused to join his sister's rebellion. Matthew's final memory of Odessa is of her angrily accusing him of cowardice as she stormed off to fight for her people. Ironically, the overzealous Imperial Guard wind up being the Liberation Army's saving grace by storming Matthew's school and taking a child hostage. This gives Mike and company the opportunity to save the day, and once they've done so, Matthew reluctantly agrees to aid the Liberation Army, having realized that he can no longer hide from this war. However, he refuses to take Odessa's place as leader and insists that, at least for the time being, Mike be the one to lead the Liberation Army. Seeing as how the entire resistance is all but dead in the water without Matthew's aid, Mike accepts. Their first order of business is to secure a new base of operations. Matthew suggests the nearby abandoned castle in the middle of Lake Torin. But in order to reach the castle, Mike has to defeat the easygoing fisherman Tai Ho in a round of dice, developing a crippling addiction to gambling in the process. True to his word, Tai Ho and his oath brother Yam Ku take the group across the lake to their future headquarters. There, the Liberation Army swiftly learn that the abandoned castle isn't quite as abandoned as they hoped. Monsters have taken a shine to the place and they aren't leaving without a fight. This culminates in Mike's party facing off against...
Call of the Haunted brought all of them back from the grave, and they're zombies now!
They're zombies?
Dragon zombie, attack the Axe Raider!
Really? Really?
Really?
Really?
Really? Really? Really?
Release restraint level 1.
Level what?
With the zombie dragon dead a second time now, the castle is theirs. All Mike has to do is come up with a rad name for their new headquarters. Much like his namesake, he is terrible at coming up with names and just steals one of the first suggestions while everyone around him humors him and pretends that Dragon Castle is a great name. It's at this point that summarizing the plot becomes difficult. Not because it's super complex or anything, just that doing so makes the story seem much more dry than it really is. Most of the game is spent gathering allies and steadily gaining ground on the Empire as you progress through the mini story arcs of each section. I don't have too much deep analysis or commentary on a lot of it either, since I would like to not spoil any more for anyone still watching who hasn't yet played Suikoden. I'm gonna cut the full recap here. Seriously, despite my gripe with that one line of dialogue in Odessa's death scene, I genuinely think that this is a game worth your time and money. So if you haven't played this yet, please skip ahead to my final thoughts right here. The way I'm going to talk about the rest of this probably won't mean much to people who haven't played it anyways. First of all, the Great Forest arc. Is it a requirement to always write elves as self-centered dickheads? Suikoden has no problem turning kobolds from squat lizardmen into good doggy folk, so why keep the elves as holier-than-thou jerks? Better yet, why can't I get a dwarven recruit too? Nobody would miss Stallion. Well, I wouldn't. At least I got Valeria out of this.
Hey, baby. Are you one of the ones who, does it?
My hatred of the damn knife ears aside, it's the end of this arc where my real problem comes in at. I seriously hate the reveal that Quanda Roseman and the other generals, besides Teo, are being controlled by Windy through a corrupted rune. It feels like a cheap excuse so that the player can recruit the generals without feeling guilty about letting off war criminals with a slap on the wrist. Mind control is a tricky plot device that all too often winds up falling flat like this. I'd much rather there have been a gray area to this by either making the generals less cartoonishly evil, or by having their stats be out of this world, but as a consequence recruiting them will cost you other recruits. For example, Valeria and the elves would abandon you if you chose to recruit Quanda. I'm aware this wasn't what the developers were going for in the first place, I'm just spitballing. In contrast, the next part up against Milich Oppenheimer is where I think the storytelling kicks up a notch. Gremio is an intensely annoying presence throughout the game and always forcing his way into the party with no option for the player to deny him. That doesn't make his sacrifice any less brutal though. The game doesn't even need to show it, just the thought of being eaten alive by carnivorous spores until nothing remains of you but your cloak and your axe is horrifying enough. I prefer not getting the best ending simply because I think Gremio getting revived cheapens such a shocking moment. Like if DC brought back Jason Todd as a lame bat-themed version of the Punisher. Oh, right. Milich himself is also a delightfully sadistic antagonist here while under the control of the Black Rune. Again though, the Black Rune concept ruins the drama for me of choosing to absolve him of Gremio's murder, because you already know he had no control over his actions. This is a choice of saving an innocent man or murdering him to make yourself feel better, but the game frames it as a question of forgiveness. Maybe this is one of those societal things that doesn't translate well from east to west? Like, because Gremio was murdered by his hand, Milich bears responsibility regardless of whether or not he was in control of his actions. I'm not sure. Hell, I'm probably overthinking this. Then it comes time to face Daddy Dearest as Pawn. Fuck this fight, fuck this fight, fuck this fight. How you're supposed to even have a chance of winning this duel, because you can win it, without save states is beyond me. I lost track of how many times I had to redo this. Teo's pattern is completely random, and unless he uses Wild Attack enough, you'll never survive. Even if you're not going for the best ending, it's worth keeping Pawn alive just for the fact that he and Ronnie Bell have the best Unite attack in the game.
Holy shit.
As a character though, Teo is probably the best antagonist in the game. Not simply from the fact that he gets 2 whole duels, but because he's fighting his own son out of a sense of loyalty and duty to the Emperor, and not because he's under mind control. It gives real weight to the second duel against him, as they're no longer father and son in this moment. They're 2 men fighting for what they believe in. Many manly tears will be shed after you win, and Teo congratulates his son on surpassing him. And then there's the whole Necklord arc. Geez, if I didn't enjoy the banter between Victor and the Star Dragon sword, I'd have nothing good to say about this part. Necklord feels so out of place in this story. And why is his boss fight even harder than the final boss? What sense does that make? The fact that half the story here centers around Hicks, who I absolutely despise.
I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away!
Doesn't help things either. Maybe if he didn't show up again in 2 going through the exact same character arc, except this time in the form of an annoying fetch quest, I wouldn't hate this little shithead so much. Tengar isn't much better, but at least she's capable of standing up for herself. Afterwards, the plot up until the Siege of Chasarazad kind of blurs together for me. I'm not sure if that's because I was working off the excess frustration from the Necklord arc, or if it's just not that notable to me. Either way, it's unprofessional as all hell. Good thing I'm not a professional. Speaking of Chasarazad, Sonya feels like a wasted opportunity of a character. She was Teo's lover and despises your character for his death. Even if you recruit her, she only agrees because she wants to see him die with her own eyes. Seems like the perfect red herring to introduce before you start bringing up the "there's a spy among the Liberation Army" plot point, huh? Instead, we have the fight against her, and then come outside just in time to see that Sanchez shanked Matthew. Initially, I thought this twist was kind of an ass pull, but going back and seeing just how long they were setting the seeds of there being a traitor, it would have to be someone who was there back when you first met Odessa. Flick has too much big dick hero energy, Victor's got too much snicked-bub energy, and Humphrey's too boring. Considering all that, Sanchez works perfectly for this reveal because he's so nondescript that you forget he's even there half the time. The last thing I can think of to note is the reveal that, despite what she and everyone else believed, Wendy never had control over Emperor Barbarossa's mind. I can't help but feel like I would have had more of a reaction to this if Barbarossa had any sort of established character before this. Outside of right at the beginning of the game and the one scene where he lets Futch escape, Barbarossa is barely a presence in the game. Plenty is said about his character prior to the loss of his wife and meeting Wendy, but you're never shown any of this. For all the player knows, he was always a negligent monarch, and Wendy's presence only exacerbated that tendency. The older characters with a rosier view of Barbarossa could simply be choosing to only remember the good. Nostalgia's a hell of a thing, after all.
One shall stand, one shall fall. She was playing Roboto Possum.
But I'm nitpicking at this point. Suikoden still has an overall satisfying climax which wraps up the plot threads well. When thinking of how to describe Suikoden, I'm reminded of the old cliche, better than the sum of its parts. Individually, the components here are solid but nothing special. Altogether though, they become a unique experience which I'm not entirely sure has ever been replicated outside of the Suikoden series itself. You never have enough time to be bored of anything before the game has you moving on to the next. So even the parts that don't work as well are never present long enough to become a real burden on your experience. If this had simply been a one and done, that would have been impressive enough. But then along came Suikoden II. Suikoden II hurled its thunderbolt onto the PS1 in 1998 in Japan, 1999 in North America, and 2000 in PAL territories. Name any part of the first game and Suikoden II improved upon it in leaps and bounds. The combat has been improved with the addition of 2 more rune slots to provide more room for customization and experimentation. Army battles have been changed from the rock-paper-scissors formula to a full turn-based strategy segment akin to Langrisser. The sprite work, which was already good before, is now downright gorgeous with much more expressive characters and lush environments. Recruiting characters now often requires multiple steps to be completed, and even occasionally features a little story arc before they'll join. There's an entire minigame centered around cooking competitions that has no right to be as compelling as it is. The main story is leagues above the original games, a story which even the shoddy, error-riddled translation can't manage to spoil. To call Suikoden II a gem is to do disservice to it. Naturally, it sold like absolute shit and got a collective meh from critics at the time. Except IGN, ironically. They gave it a 9. Apparently the others took issue with the outdated graphics and lack of innovation in the genre.
Thank you.
But we're not here to bag on old game critics having bad takes, as fun as that can be. We're here to talk about why you should absolutely play Suikoden II for yourself. Considering that I already used it in my Final Fantasy VIII video as an example of an all-time classic, I don't think there's any point in hiding my adoration for this game.
Holy doggy bladders! It's by Sepia the Warrior Woman!
I will at least attempt to limit my gushing about Suikoden II and properly acknowledge faults where I see them. We move from the Scarlet Moon Empire to the neighboring land of Dunan, home to the Highland Kingdom and the city-state of Joustin. To say that there is no love lost between the two is to imply there ever was love between the neighboring powers. In fact, the latest conflict has only just ended, and the announcement of a truce has the soldiers eager to return home. This includes Ryo, a member of the Highland Youth Brigade, as well as his longtime friend Joey. However, as they begin to settle in for the night, city-state soldiers launch a surprise attack. Under the command of Captain Raud, the children attempt to flee but are easily overwhelmed and slaughtered. Almost too easily. Suspecting a trap, Joey convinces Ryo to turn back to their camp and inform Raud, only to discover him conversing with the heir to the Highland throne, Prince Luca Blight. The entire attack has been orchestrated by Luca to create a false pretense for restarting the war. But before Ryo and Joey can flee to tell anyone the truth, they're spotted and chased to the edge of a cliff. With no other choice, the best friends choose to take their chances with the river below, marking a nearby rock before jumping while making a promise to each other that they'll meet up there should they ever get separated. Ryo wakes to find himself in the custody of a mercenary outfit in the employ of the city-state. All things considered, though, their treatment of him is much nicer than what you'd expect from soldiers for hire working for an enemy nation. With no knowledge of what transpired at the border, the mercs assume that the war will officially be over soon and plan to let Ryo go once he's no longer an enemy. As such, Ryo spends time performing various chores in and around the fort until the night Joey appears to break him out. The pair nearly manage to make their escape, but they stand no chance against two veterans of the Gate Rune Wars. More impressed by their gumption than upset, Victor and Flick decide to hear Ryo and Joey out on why exactly two young Highland soldiers were fished out of the river when there shouldn't have been any fighting going on in the first place. Upon hearing the boys' tale, Victor and Flick express their sympathies, but admit that they still have no choice but to keep them prisoner. With the truce broken, they can't exactly let two Highland citizens deep inside city-state territory go free now, can they? More determined than ever to escape, Ryo and Joey successfully make a break for it that very night. However, that was only the first part. Now they have to figure out how they make it back across the border, back to their home. Fortunately, a chance encounter with a performer troupe consisting of siblings Rena, Eiley, and Bolgan provides the boys with the help they need to cross the border. Right after Ryo survives being Eiley's assistant. Thanks to Rena's persuasion, the group is allowed past by the border guards. One boss fight later, and Ryo and Joey are back home in the village of Chiaro. Ryo also proves his main character chops by making Eiley fall for him simply by existing in close proximity to her. Everyone says their goodbyes and all head their separate ways. While Joey gets to go home to his rich family's swanky mansion, and Rena, Eiley, and Bolgan get to move on to the next gig, Ryo has to face the music and confront his greatest fear. His overprotective sister, Nanami. Their happy reunion doesn't last long before Highland soldiers come to arrest Ryo. He and Joey have been branded city-state spies, and blame for the massacre of the Youth Brigade is laid squarely upon their shoulders. Imprisoned by both sides of a war within a 24-hour span, that has to be a record. It's a good thing that Victor and Flick picked up their trail in time to rescue our heroes from the gallows. Considered traitors to their homeland now, Ryo and Joey have no choice but to flee back to the city-state with Nanami in tow. Having seen for themselves what fate awaits the boys back home, Victor and Flick allow Ryo, Joey, and Nanami the freedom to roam about so long as they don't cause any problems. The kids take advantage of this opportunity to visit the nearby village of Toto, where Joey introduces them to Pilika and her family, who were the ones to rescue Joey from the river after he and Ryo were separated. Pilika soon asks Uncle Joey to go on an errand to the capital city of Muse to buy an amulet as a present for her dad. Naturally, it's impossible to say no to such an adorable little kid. Besides, it won't take that long, and what could possibly happen while they're gone? Luca Blight. Luca Blight happens. For no real strategic purpose whatsoever, Luca has his forces raze Toto to the ground as he revels in slaughtering the innocent townsfolk. If there ever was the beating heart of a human being inside of Luca Blight, it died long ago. In its place is a misanthropic being of pure sadism. To him, the world is nothing more than his slaughterhouse, and those around him pigs ready for the butchering. There's no more question in anyone's mind, even if it means siding with the city-state in this war. Luca Blight must be stopped. Now that the story's got everyone hooked, let's take a step back and discuss changes from Suikoden I to Suikoden II. Like I said before, Suikoden II has improvements across the board. While the base battle system has changed very little from the first game, having up to 3 rune magic slots for each character provides much greater versatility to magic users. Now the same caster can be capable of utilizing both area attack magic as well as high damage single target magic, with the only caveat being that they pull from the same spell count. It is a fair trade-off once you consider the amount of damage you could be dealing otherwise. Unite attacks have been expanded as well. If I counted correctly, there are 37 in Suikoden II compared to the first game's 25. There are even a few special versions that will happen at random, like in Ryo and Nanami's Unite, where, occasionally, Nanami will take a break while her brother does all the work. It deals less damage naturally, but it will also provide Nanami with some healing. I also just find it funny. One of my favorite improvements in Suikoden II is in recruiting. Recruiting the majority of characters in Suikoden I merely involves finding them and having a high enough level or large enough castle. In 2, however, far more characters have specific requirements you'll need to puzzle out, or look up in a guide, before they join. Some will bounce across the map as you progress in their side story, while others require you to do specific actions. The returning stallion, for instance, requires you to flee from battle 50 total times, and have your castle at a specific level of progress. I forgot that part and wasted a lot of time trying to recruit him too soon. Some will even have their own full side quest, complete with a bonus dungeon before you can recruit them. There are so many characters that it's easy for them to get lost in the shuffle, so it's nice that Suikoden II takes some extra time to let more of them make an impression on you. Though I would like to ask why Clive here has his own post-recruitment side quest that all but demands you speedrun the game in order to see it through. Like I said in my System Shock video, I don't like timers in my games. I like them even less in games that require me to grind. And yet I'm not allowed at any moment to let Ryo reciprocate Eileen's feelings. Come on, you all know deep down that a date side quest would have been adorable. Bolgan as the waiter, Nanami in a terrible disguise trying to spy on them, and Rina just nursing a drink at the bar as she watches the chaos unfold. But this isn't Sakura Wars, so no rom-com shenanigans for us. It's a shame too, since the improved sprites make the comedy scenes that are present land much better than the first games. Shocker of all shocks, more expressive characters allow for better comedy. It also means Ryo gets to do this cool twirl of his tonfas when he wins a duel. Tonfas are objectively one of the coolest martial arts weapons to begin with, but moments like this just seal Ryo as a way cooler character than me. I mean Mike. I mean Tyr! He's cooler than both of us.
Yeah, baby, I know it.
A fact I would demonstrate by recruiting the hero of the first game, which you can do if you carry over your save, but I screwed up. And I was too far into recording to be willing to go back and redo it all once I did realize. Oh well. Suikoden II is also home to several of my favorite recruits, almost all of whom sadly never make another appearance in the franchise. You've got Anita, Valerie's flirty drunk of a rival, Marley, our resident Belmont stand-in, Richmond, who is literally just Columbo.
I'm gonna have to send you to the Columbo dimension.
Ulan, the only woman in this game more perfect than Valeria. Honestly, I'll be here all day listing most of the cast if I keep at it. The one you absolutely must recruit, though, is this man here, Hi-Yo. This unassuming chef kicks off his own subplot, complete with an Iron Chef-style minigame built around assembling a 3-course meal to impress 4 judges picked from your own army. Hi-Yo's subplot has zero relevance whatsoever to the rest of the game, and there isn't a huge reward or anything to completing it, yet it's one of the most compelling parts of Suikoden II. The devs snuck in one entire arc of a cooking anime, over-the-top intrigue and everything, into their medieval warfare RPG. How can you not love this game? Speaking of medieval warfare, while I still say the army battles have seen a substantial improvement from the first game's simplistic approach, If I'm gonna compare them to their obvious inspirations, then I have to acknowledge that they fall short in comparison. First off, they're primarily used for honestly clever bits of storytelling rather than being full-on strategic battles. I would say a good 3/4 of them are resolved with the player input not really mattering all too much. A retreat is called, someone pulls off an ambush, etc., etc. When you do get to fight a whole battle, Suikoden II gets within arm's reach of that title belt that Langrisser, Shining Force, and Fire Emblem before it have all nabbed in years past. But it just can't quite get a grip on the strap before the ladder topples over. I want you to look at these two numbers here, attack and defense. What's your first thought about how this would function in a turn-based strategy game? Is it that attack determines the amount of damage done to a unit's HP while defense offsets a certain amount? Because that's what I thought when I first played it. I was dead wrong. See, I was thinking too practically here, too easy for the player to understand at a glance, when I obviously should have seen that it's how the game determines a chance to hit. Yes, for reasons unknown to anyone outside of the Suikoden II team, not only is this merely about whether or not you hit the other side enough to cause any meaningful damage, there's no way of seeing that chance to hit unless you've recruited this one character halfway into the game and assigned her to a unit. And even then, you'll only see the chances for that unit specifically. Forcing the player to intuit their odds would be a bad design choice in a proper strategy RPG. In a game where you rarely even do these sorts of fights and have no way to practice them, that's outright hostility towards the player. Why I still consider this an upgrade over the previous version of army battles, and why I don't consider this to be potentially game-ruining, is both that they're few and far between, and that they are at least easier than the battles in the games that inspired this mechanic. A bad roll or two may cause a frustrated reset, but you go play Genealogy of the Holy War or Der Langrisser and come talk to me about pain and frustration. Damn, I love those games. Alright, it's time to talk big boy spoilers now. If you haven't played Suikoden II before, please just pause this video or click off it entirely and go play it. Even more so than with Suikoden I, this is absolutely 100% without a shadow of a doubt, insert cliche here, an RPG worth playing. Nothing I'll talk about after this will change that fact. So this is your last warning. If you care at all about spoilers, either skip ahead to this point or go and play it yourself before coming back. I won't take offense. I'm just glad anyone watches my videos at all. Okay, everyone ready? Alright, here's my rambling thoughts on the plot. Does the visit to Gregminster feel like an afterthought to anyone else? Just getting there is frustrating as all hell, and having to do it multiple times because I'm a moron who keeps forgetting about recruits there was very grating. The choice between having Valeria or Kasumi join you is an odd one too. I mean, the idea of having mutually exclusive recruits is a cool addition, but it's weird to have that with two returning characters rather than two new ones if you ask me. Outside of folks like me who are firmly in Valeria's camp, or those who are obviously wrong and in Kasumi's, I have to assume most returning players found being forced to choose annoying more than interesting. One different party member in a cast of 108 doesn't exactly scream replay value to me either. And for experienced players about to mention it in the comments, I do know about the choice when it comes to which beast you recruit with the listening crystals. I was just in such a hurry to finish getting footage for this video that Abisboa slipped my mind, and instead I just quickly grabbed Siegfried and Feather. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Let me make it up to you by talking about Luca Blight. Luca Blight is one of the greatest villains on the entire PS1. To me, he is the epitome of how a great villain doesn't need to be a deep, three-dimensional person. He doesn't need to have a hint of good inside of him. He only needs to be compelling. Luca Blight is compelling and then some. He carries with him so much presence in every scene, and the sadism he displays in moments like when he forces a pleading woman to act like a pig before he'll spare her life, only to kill her anyways, make him an enemy you won't forget, and one you can't wait to defeat. It's interesting too, because that scene should have crossed over into being funny to me. I should find it comical how two-dimensionally evil he is, like Lex Luthor stealing 40 cakes. Instead, it manages to provide a visceral edge to a bloodless T-rated game. Every time he's on screen serves to remind the player how vile Luca Blight is. At times he almost feels like a natural disaster in human flesh. He leaves behind nothing in his wake but death and devastation, but what else would you expect from this monster? even the brief hints of a past that made him the way he is do nothing to dampen his menace. If anything, it makes Luca Blight that much scarier, because this unstoppable beast used to be an ordinary child. The final fight against him is just a masterclass in game design. To tell the truth, I generally find boss battles to be disappointing. They're either difficult enough that the frustration of trying to beat them ruins the narrative's pacing for me, or they're so easy that it feels like a bad joke. Not this fight. Luca Blight's boss battle is absolutely earned. The fact that it takes his own side abandoning him and 3 separate parties to finally bring him down cements Luca as the apex predator he is, and gives us one of the finest boss battles in RPG history. The story, character, and gameplay all coalesce into this glorious moment that could have easily served as the grand finale. Even his death scene is so brilliantly done. After countless hours of fighting, fending off 18 different elite fighters of Ryo's rebel army, Luca Blight is at last worn down and on death's door. As he searches for any way to escape, Luca comes across a pendant hanging from a tree branch. Out of curiosity, he opens it, and a flurry of fireflies scurry out into the night air. A lesser RPG would have made this the moment he shows remorse or gets philosophical about the nature of life and death. Instead, in a perfect summation of his character, Luca simply mutters, "How stupid." At the end of it all, he is incapable of appreciating any of the smallest moments. Life exists for him to end it. Nothing more, nothing less. Then, more like a wounded animal than a man, he's put out of his misery with a volley of arrows. The monster is slain at last, having learned absolutely nothing. Then Joey continues the war because he's a stupid little shit that I can't believe has fans. It's not his assassination of Annabelle that ruins him for me, nor is it him working as Luca's second-in-command. It's this moment. Joey, now married to Jillia Blight and crowned King of Highland, has every opportunity to tell the truth of what happened, to explain that it was Luca Blight and Luca Blight alone who had orchestrated it all, that he was a monster of the highest caliber and a shame to all of Highland. The war died with him. Highland is going home. Would it prevent future wars? Maybe not. But the fucking gall this little Mussolini wannabe has in saying that the city-state fighting for its right to exist makes them at fault for any further death pisses me off. No, everything has to be how Joey sees the world. Might makes right. Even after he saw where that mentality got Luca. Joey is a petulant child who was handed an entire nation on a silver platter and chose to drive it to ruin. Top to bottom, his entire "the world sucks, so I'll kill even more people and rule it with an iron fist in the name of peace" is at such a high level of juvenile idiocy that I'm amazed this is part of the same story at all. There is nothing morally gray about this, however much the game may try to convince me otherwise. Every possible mistake that was expertly sidestepped in Luca's characterization, Suikoden II dives headlong into when it comes to Joey after his heel turn. I'm pretty sure everything post-Luca also had a different localization team on it or something too, because it takes a nosedive as well. There are spelling and grammar errors galore throughout Suikoden II, but when you can't even remember how you spell your main antagonist's name anymore, you've clearly given up. Konami's translators were never all that great, but there are parts of the late game where I wonder just how rushed this localization process was. I don't believe that it's purely translation issues when it comes to Joey's characterization, but it does not help. Part of me wishes that Luca had been the villain the whole way through. Despite being a more personal foe for Ryo, King Joey is an exhausting bore who loves to hear himself talk. That the first ending most players will get doesn't even feature a final confrontation with him only makes it all the more frustrating. You shouldn't have to collect all 108 stars of destiny before you can duel with him at the cliffs he and Ryo dove from at the start. And yes, I do kill him. I utterly despise the so-called golden ending where Ryo ditches everyone at the castle without a word so he can go adventuring around the world with King Peace Through Murder and the sister who faked her death when she could have simply told him, "Hey, I don't feel like doing any of this fighting anymore." In my view, this is a story about how life doesn't always go the way you want it, and how even the closest of friends can drift far, far apart. Offering an ending like this spits in the face of that notion. Luckily, you have to go out of your way to get this ending. The more I write this script, the more I realize that the final stretch of Suikoden II just kinda stumbles ahead in pursuit of that glorious peak it reached with Luca Blight's death. It's not outright bad, I might even overlook some of these issues in other games, but it sticks out pretty badly when put up against what came before it. I'm reminded a lot of the Batman storyline Nightfall. Bane expertly breaks down Batman to his core, shatters his spine, and almost even succeeds in destroying Bruce's will to live. He continues to be a threat lurking in the background as the reformed assassin Azrael takes up the mantle of Batman while Bruce recovers. Then Asbats takes Bane down and the story just keeps going. While the storyline itself stays strong afterwards, Bane was never the same as a character again. He wound up being turned into just another one of Batman's villains.
I got a razzie zazzy for Bang.
It's Bane! You know it's Bane! I'm here every day, Todd. Goddamn millennial.
Every storyline that involved him tended to leave the reader thinking, man, Nightfall sure was awesome, wasn't it? That's how the last stretch of Suikoden II makes me feel. Man, the rest of this game was really fantastic, wasn't it? I don't consider that to be a damnation of the game as a whole, though, if that makes any sense. This isn't gymnastics, after all. Not sticking the landing doesn't always invalidate everything that came before. My dislike of the direction the story goes in after a certain point doesn't destroy my enjoyment of the rest. The gameplay loop continues to be fun enough that it doesn't feel like a chore the rest of the way there, and breaking up the story bits with Hayo's cooking adventures keep me hanging in there each time I replay Suikoden II. It's a great game in pursuit of perfection. 10 out of 10 times, I would say that describes a game worth playing. As I said before, I referred to Suikoden II as an all-time classic in my Final Fantasy VIII video. Even after replaying it and taking issue with later plot developments, I stand by that statement. Everything took such a strong step forward from its predecessor that the baseline quality of Suikoden I is at roughly the same level as II's low points. With a stronger plot, though I don't care for the execution of certain developments later on, improved gameplay, great sprite work, and one of my all-time favorite villains, I consider Suikoden II to be among the best role-playing games on the PlayStation. Almost certainly the absolute best among RPGs on the system not carrying the name Square or Enix. If we're lucky, Konami will manage to not be Konami for a minute or two, and the forthcoming HD remaster bundle of these two games will be an excellent way to enjoy Suikoden. I'm not expecting anything on par with Live a Live, guys. I just want a legit way to play it on my PC. Regardless, for fans of classic console RPGs who haven't given either Suikoden game a shot, definitely check them out. And even if you aren't big on games like these, I still think they're worth a look. That's it for these games. I'll see you next time. Oh yeah, and for those wondering, I am planning on talking about the rest of the series in time. Yes, even the Japanese exclusive ones. Okay, now I'll see you next time.